I'm really excited, if I may say so, to the topicalities that we are going to discuss today, because we deliberately, as almost all of the events that we have within our discursive program, so it's deliberately structured that each of the discussions or presentations contains a different overlapping perspectives in some sense. So, and this is very much the cause today as well, because we will be discussing the issue of the displacement, migrants, refuge, starting from the Second World War up to the war in Syria and the current Russians' war against Ukraine, and how these experiences have been recurring, and actually how the displacement itself have changed over time throughout the last 80 years or so. So thank you so much, dear panelists, for that you so kindly agreed to join us. I will be introducing our panelists in the row of appearance, so to say. So I'm really happy to welcome Jan Tomasz Gross, a legendary historian who studies modern Europe, focusing on comparative politics, totalitarian regimes, Soviet and East European politics, and the Holocaust. Jan Tomasz, after growing up in Poland, has immigrated to the US in 1969. Among the books that are worth mentioning are Revolution from Abroad, Poland and the Baltic States between 1939-41, where he analyzed how the Soviet regime was imposed on these countries. Another very famous book titled Neighbors, which appeared in 2001, that studies a particular case of a Polish small town, Jedwabne, where all Jewish residents were killed in actually one single day. He was also a co-editor of the volume titled The Politics of Retribution in Europe, the Second World War and its Aftermath. And he has been teaching in many universities, including the Princeton University, New York University, Yale, universities in Paris, Vienna, Krakow, and he's a professor of history, emeritus professor of history at Princeton. I'm also very happy to have with us Yassin al-Haj Saleh, a political journalist, writer, and political activist who was born in Syria, in Raqqa, and who was also a political prisoner for opposing the regime of Hafez Assad that is still, in a way, on in the respective country. He authored many books about Syria, modern Islam, Islamism, in Arabic, in English. You can read the book of his titled The Impossible Revolution, Revolution, Civil War, and the General War in Syria, which appeared in 2017. He was also awarded many prizes and was a fellow at the Wissenschaftskolleg zu Berlin some years ago. And I'm also very happy to have a Ukrainian colleague and dear friend of mine, Kateryna Iakovlenko, who is at the moment the culture editor-in-chief of the Ukrainian public broadcaster called Suspilne, which perhaps might be translated as civic TV or civic media. She is a contemporary art researcher, curator, writer, and among her publications that worth mentioning is a book, Why There Are Great Women Artists in Ukrainian Art, which appeared in 2019. She also published many texts on eFlux and art forums throughout the last 2 years or so. And among her exhibitions that she curated were I Dreamed of Beasts at Galeria Labyrinth in Lublin, Everyone is afraid of Baker, and I thank you, which was held in Irpin. It was an apartment exhibition in 2022. And the most recent one, perhaps, Our Fears, Our Worlds, Our Searches, Our Us, which took place in last year actually at Gem Factory in Lviv, and she is also currently the co-curator of the Security Archive project, Women Artists at War, which is still ongoing. So our format for tonight will be that each of our participants will make input of 15 minutes or so, and then we will be exchanging our perspectives, of course, reserving some time for the Q&A with the public. And first of all, if I may ask the question to Jan Tomasz Gross, who will be, I believe, speaking about refugees and displacement in the context of the Second World War. And I think when I was thinking about this aspect of today's discussion, first of all, what is constantly coming obviously to our minds, and that we also got another proof for that after the terror attack in Moscow yesterday. What is really striking, how the Second World War has been constantly a kind of a recurring and permanent reference for the Kremlin in order to start this unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. So it has been from the very beginning, even from 2014, but also especially from February 22, it has been a kind of a constant, obscene, propagandistic reenactment, as if the Russians are still fighting what they call the Nazis. And this Nazi reference appeared again just today in the morning from the speech of a person who calls himself the Russian president. But on the other hand, I also remember that exactly 2 years ago, in the first weeks, and I am sure Kateryna remembers it also very well, but also perhaps you, I remember these photos of Ukrainian train stations, which had been used as evacuation centers especially in the first months of the full-scale invasion. And there were, like throughout the social media, there were many attempts or this kind of aesthetical adjustments of these photos to make them black and white and to publish them. And what was really striking, that they didn't differ much from the photos made 80 years ago. So they really reminded the photos of the Second World War times. And I think like this timelessness of the war and constant presence is something really so much affecting the current experiences of the refugees. So as you have been so much studying this issue, we are really very much looking forward to your take on that. Yeah, you can use the microphone, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vasil, for the invitation, and this is a privilege to be here. I feel a little bit like an interloper in a way, because it's my very deep conviction that when one speaks of displacement and refuge, one should speak in a way from personal experience. It's we very often when thinking about large-scale phenomena, and certainly displacement and refuge is a condition and a fate that's being suffered by tens of millions of people. We think that just using general numbers to some extent gives you some information about what's going on, but then really this is a combination of individual destinies. And in the case of displacement and refuge, this is in some way more true than of other large-scale phenomena and disasters, because there are so many different trajectories of what actually people experience. And my personal encounter, so to speak, with that condition, first of all, is a very mild one, and that's also characteristic of the phenomenon in general. There are so many different versions, so to speak, of biographical of destinies due to so many things: coincidence, luck, just it's contingent on precisely this sort of unpredictability, as it were, who one encounters, what people do to help us. So mine is a very mild one. It's some 6 years ago. There was a period when of kind of a minor upheaval that took place in Poland, though. This was a phenomenon that reverberated around the world, it seems to me, as well, because the date of 1968, I don't know whether to the present generation it means very much, but 68ers were rebelling against the generation of their parents all over the world, really. Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Paris, in America. So, in any case, there was a time when the people of Jewish background were in some way expelled from Poland in 1968. This was just a very mild event, if you will, in the context of various disasters that has befallen Eastern Europe. And this is what I was one of those, and suffered minor consequences. The main ones were that for a number of years one didn't have any documents, any papers, and this is very difficult in the world where bureaucracies govern your destinies. And I must say there were consequences in my life resulting from it. Important, but and then the other part of justification for my being here, I mean, the main one really is that I studied the war afterwards. This is what Vasil mentioned, and indeed the story of displacement and during the Second World War was just something that has occurred on an extraordinary, enormous scale. And again, in a tremendous variety of narratives, so to speak. I think the Second World War was such a profound trauma, and an experience of such enormous transformative power that it created in various countries sort of they reconstructed themselves after the war with an eye towards what happened during the war. I mean, certainly it's very true about Germany. But it's also true about the Soviet Union, or what is Russia today. If you think about the way this regime, the Soviet regime still, built up its legitimacy, in following the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, as they called it, it became much more of a legitimizing foundation than Marxism, Leninism, and the Bolshevik Revolution. This was in some way, for Stalin, the way to emancipate himself from Lenin and from under his wings. Now, then he is the great savior, and the nation is then constructed on the basis of a story about this great triumph during the Second World War. The experience, the history of the Second World War from the point of the Soviet Union is an very complicated and strange story. I mean, beginning with the fact that for the first year and a half of the war, Stalin and Hitler were de facto allies. Something that you will not find, of course, in any of the current the currently available, as it were, narratives, the way the war is told in Russia. If you have been in Russia recently or follow what's going on there, you will know that the Second World War in Russia started in 1941. Things that have happened between 1939 and 41 do not somehow belong to the history of the war. In other words, the whole story of Soviet and Nazi collaboration is something that has been excised. The other very bizarre aspect of the Second World War in Russia is, if you think about it, at the conclusion of the war, I don't remember exact numbers, but somewhere around 10 or 15%, about 1 million people maybe, who were wearing uniforms that German uniforms, or uniforms of units that were fighting with the Germans, were former citizens of the Soviet Union. So in a sense, the scale of collaboration, if you will, and all of this, despite the extraordinary cruelty and brutality of German behavior on the Eastern Front vis-à-vis Soviet citizens of various national groups, Ukrainians, but first of all, of course, against the Jews. So in any case, the whole story of the Second World War is just deeply falsified in the Russian narrative. It functioned in the Soviet Union still as a basic legitimization narrative for the regime, and it functions as a legitimization narrative for Putin. If you think about this crazy thing that was going on from the first day of attack in February of 22 on Ukraine, they have banned and forbid the use of the word war. Until I think it's only yesterday that for the first time one of the officials, maybe it was Peskov, I don't remember, who exactly used the word war in a kind of an official capacity. That I'm not sure what the consequences of it will be, but I'm sure that there will be important consequences. This is a threshold that has been crossed, of some ways. They couldn't. The only role that the Russian statesmen and therefore public, because statesmen want to be presented to the public, can be conceived in the context of war is as that of victims and champions of the right cause and defenders against invasion. So what they had done in attacking Ukraine, of course, is totally incompatible with the fate that was later mythologized in the Soviet history about and Russian history about war. Let me stop here. It's perhaps this is just what I want to say.
Yeah, thanks so much. We will follow up on this. If I may ask you, Yassin, I think my general question in this regard, So one of the things which, as I remember, that since 2014 I have been taking part in so many events with some colleagues from Syria, and that was quite surprising, I think, both for us as well as for the mostly Western publics, how much in common the wars in Syria and Ukraine have had and actually still have. So maybe you can also, yeah, so my general question would be, would it be right to say that Ukraine in the current situation is a kind of a Syrian case, right? And what is the roots in terms of refugees, in terms of the aggressors involved, right? And what are the roots of this Syrian refugee issue, which so much transformed the European Union from inside and at the same time contributed to what is on the other side of the European wall, so to say.
So first of all, thank you. Thank you, Vasil, for inviting me. Thank you for showing up. I think there are many similarities between the situation in Syria and Ukraine. Maybe the biggest difference is that in Ukraine, you have one Russia. In Syria, we have two Russias. One of them is called the United States of America. So, yeah, which makes things, and it is a chronic issue. It has been going for 13 years and a few days now. It is the anniversary of the uprising in Syria was just a few days ago. Anyway, I will take you to another part of the world, to the Middle East, to Syria, and to Palestine, and I have written a text. I hope it will not take more than 15 minutes. And maybe we'll have another round of talk about these issues. And I'll take, actually, I wrote it as if I had already the advice of Tomasz in my mind to start from the personal thing in a way. So my friend Ahmed is now stuck in Bosnia in the last 3 months. In Mostar, in Bosnia. He's a writer, a translator, and a former political prisoner. We were both in jail in Aleppo in 1980s and a bit of 90s. He spent 9 years there. Before coming to Bosnia and then stuck there, Ahmed was living with his family in Gaziantep in Turkey. Through smugglers, Ahmed tried to make it to the Netherlands, where he has many friends. Most of them were his or our prison mates in 1980s and early 90s. The plan did not work. After 14 hours of arduous walk through the forests in Croatia, Ahmed, who is 62, fell severely ill and had to submit himself to the Croatian police. He was tortured heavily and forced to return to Bosnia. Ahmed is now trying to find help, either to become a refugee in Europe or to be allowed to go back to Turkey without being forcibly repatriated. His family is still in Turkey. So in Turkey, Ahmed's situation grew more vulnerable in the last few years, being without legal status of a refugee, like the majority of 3,700,000 Syrians in the country, in Turkey. And in need for special travel permit, even for moving within Turkey itself. The status of guest through which Syrians were identified in Turkey turned out in the last few years to unwelcoming situation, to the degree of enforced repatriation of many. Whenever you have a problem and you are in the hands of police, the Turkish police, they will take you back Syria. And at time, many families were shattered in this way, very arbitrarily. This is the nightmare, the repatriation. This is the nightmare many Syrians feel threatened by, and it is the root cause why many of them are trying to arrive in Europe. Refugees without, they are refugees without refuge and without homeland, stuck somewhere in an immobile transition, as a recurrent pattern we see spreading on the way to Europe from the Middle East or Africa. One may talk of buffer zones, Greece, Bosnia, and Croatia, in which people are stuck and where the temporary tends to be perpetual. There are hundreds of refugees in Bosnia in 4 camps. Some of them have been there for years. They keep trying to arrive in Europe with diminishing chances of success. There are thousands, actually the last number I saw, 17,500 stuck in Greek islands, the Greek islands closer to Turkey. And thousands of people are always on the move in the Balkans, trying to make it to Europe. A few weeks before Ahmad's story, 4 Syrian men in a Lebanese prison put ropes around their necks and threatened to hang themselves if they were forced to go back to Syria. I mean, though they were in jail, they didn't want to go back to Syria. Most of the 1 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon led quite miserable lives there, but they still don't want to return home because of the fear for their lives. Syrian refugees in Lebanon are not guests like in Turkey. They are called nazihin, which means displaced, just displaced. They don't use the term refugees because of the related connotation of the term. When you talk about refugees, they have to have the rights of refugees, according to international law. So, among close to 7 million Syrians displaced externally in 126 countries, according to a report by Human Rights Watch some 2 years ago, hardly 1 million have the legal status of refugees, those who are in Europe. 6 million are stuck somewhere. Refugees without refuge and without homeland is also the condition of some 85% of the Gaza population in the last 5 months and a half, living under unthinkable conditions of a plausible genocide, according to the International Court Justice, the decree of International Court of Justice in February. They have nowhere to go to, and their homes are destroyed over their heads. 32,000 of them has been killed so far, and it's quite probable that thousands are dead under the rubble of their own homes. 80% of these 2,300,000 of the Gaza population were already refugees, displaced from different parts of Palestine, where Israel was established in 1948, and have been living in the biggest and most crowded open-air prison in the world. This is not my expression, open air, the biggest open air. It is widely used by some journalists, Israeli journalists. Actually, it is the title of a book by, if I am not mistaken, Ilan Pappé, which is one of the new Israeli historians. And it is now, you find it in international media. So why it's a prison? Why is it a prison? Because it has been under siege since 2006 Gaza is on the sea. It is just 360 square kilometers. It is on the sea, but no port and no exchange with the world whatsoever. And it is also sieged from the sky and from all the entrances around, even from the Egyptian side. So 80% of the population of this open-air prison were already refugees, and they are part of 750,000 Palestinians who were ethnically cleansed at that time. 3/4 of the Palestinian in 1948. 1/4 of the population remained in Palestine at that time. As we see from the Palestinian example, the condition of homelessness tends to be a long-term one, even perpetual. I think that it is so because it is structurally related to colonialism, central colonialism in this specific case. In Syria, it is also structural, though related to a long-term tyranny that can be interpreted as a sort of internal colonialism. Inviting Iranians and Russians to protect the regime from its people is an indicator of this colonial constitution of the regime. What brings these two sorts of colonialism together is that their histories are histories of war, permanent war. This is so because both are built on grave injustices that has never been dealt with properly, whether for Palestinians or for Syrians. And we don't see signs of dealing with them in a way that promise the victims of a different future. I am not talking about full justice. I am talking just a promise for a different, a bit better situation. I am not qualified to talk about Ukraine, not here, at least. All of you are qualified far better than me. But the plans of imperialist Russia to occupy the country means to Palestinize or to Syrianize the Ukrainians, like the Syrians in the last 13 years. And unfortunately, unlike what President Zelensky thinks, in a way, he identified Ukraine with Israel rather than with Palestine. Putin's Russia is another state of permanent war. I think the roots of permanent war lies in what Timothy Snyder, maybe Schneider, an American academic and specialist in Russia, called politics of eternity. That's politics without future, without promise. And everything is already and where everything is already predetermined. Reading Alexander Dugin, Putin's mind, when you read Alexander Dugin's work, he was called Putinized. I think they are not on good terms right now. Proves this clearly, that everything is already predetermined and that there's sort of manifest destiny for Russia to expand in the area around it. Independently from Snyder's work, I have been focusing for years on how eternal rule in Syria, because as Vasil said, the Assad family has been ruling the country for 54 years now, which is quite an eternal rule. I have been focusing for years on the eternal rule, that how eternal rule is compatible with abolishing plurality and political liberties and privatizing the public power, privatizing the state. The owners of power can be an autocrat like in Russia, a family like in Syria, an ethnicity like in Israel and present-day India, a military elite like in Egypt, a race like what white supremacists aspire to in the US and I guess in Europe. And I see this condition, which tends to be global, as promising of explosions only. So 35 years after the fall of communism, I think the world is in need for a vision, for a new vision, for a new project, a utopia in a way. That deals with the aggravating inequalities, instabilities, and wars, with their production of death and refugees. Thomas Piketty, the French economist, thinks of migration as a method of redistribution of the wealth on the global scale. If capital, this is his idea, his argument, if capital doesn't go to the poorer countries, the poor will move to the prosperous countries as a means of better income, gaining better income. This is not the direct reason behind why most Syrians, Palestinians, and Ukrainians are refugees. It is not about income, but but it is an important reason why the only alternative imaginable in these conditions are like AfD. It is the reason why there are no alternatives in Europe. I mean, just to guard this unequal condition. Piketty himself says that when the socio-economic structures are naturalized, considered as a natural thing, an eternal thing, issues of identity and culture and religion tend to be politicized and mobilized and to become the only issue of public debate. We talk all the time about identities and races and religions because we took socio-economic issues out of the debate. The opposite should happen. From this, I want to say that we are stuck in time. It is not that many refugees, millions, are stuck in different countries, different places. It is that we, the humanity at large, is stuck in time. An Athena situation. There is no alternative, as Margaret Thatcher said in 1980s. And this stuckedness is a global condition. We are in a temporal jail. Stuck means that we are in a jail, but temporal jail, that in a permanent prison, so to speak, without future. And it can be worse than the spatial jails that my friend Ahmed and myself experienced in the past. From this, I want to say, my friend Ahmed wanted to have refuge in Europe for a better future for his family. They cannot go back to Syria because it is not secure for them to do so, and Ahmed cannot stay in Turkey under the sway of enforced repatriation at any time. He is stuck in a sort of immobile transition or transitional immobility. He said that these 3 months, we talked only this just 3 or 4 hours ago. He said that these 3 months were worse than his time in jail. What he misses most is company, people with whom to exchange words, memories, and smiles. Worst of all is that he does not know when things will change, if ever. And his situation is a metaphor of a growingly global condition. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think with our third speaker, Kateryna Iakovlenko, we will go exactly follow with a personal, very personal level, because in a way, like all of us, if I may say so, are somehow of a refugee background in that or another sense, but you experienced it really very literally, but also I think even the title that you proposed is very much telling. So apart from drawing from your own experience, how would you describe how displacement and refuge have shaped the art realm, and especially those cultural places which are run by the artists themselves? And what are your curatorship approach towards this aspect?
Yeah, thank you, Vasil. And as you see, my question is why I came back to Ukraine and decided not to be a refugee. And I'm really sorry if it will touch someone else, but this is the way which I choose, and I'm really happy to have this choice. So it would be more like maybe an artist talk, I don't know, but let's see. So why did I come back to Ukraine? And the last time I was asked this question was on the 2nd anniversary of full-scale invasion. A journalist from US public broadcaster asked me why I returned to Ukraine if there is still a war. But it's dangerous and you can die, he said. And one of my favorite poems by Serhiy Zhadan is entitled To Live Means to Die. And in this poetry, he uses the phrase, having died once. It seems to me that in some extent I have already died twice. The first time it was in 2014 when Russia created an illegal referendum and for the past 10 years occupied my native city in the Luhansk region. For these 10 years, they have been trying to destroy my past, my memories from my childhood, and recreate the history, pretending that all my life never happened there. The second time I died, but didn't, in March 2022, and at that time my apartment in Irpin was hit by Russia twice, and you can see two images, one of which was made almost a year after it happened. What appeared before me was not an apartment or home. The story of my evacuation, which happened 2 weeks earlier, also has detail that is still difficult to forget. And I returned home for the first time in early June 2022. That appeared before me. It was not apartment or home, but a descent with ashes. And I think that as a burns, I think about it as a burns, as it if you are touching scars that are hidden from fire damage. It hurts every time you touch them, even though the skin has healed. At the time, the skin of my apartment was entirely burned, and I tried to recreate the dead skin cells. So do I with my professional and personal life as well. Everything turned the ashes and lost, but then at the end it gave me an understanding of how to look at the art, and that empty spaces are actually filled with alienated by death, destroyed art, killed and persecuted people, forgotten heritage, and book that fell apart in my hands. At the end, that there is no end in the history and there is no beginnings, I wrote about it a lot and tried to understand all my feelings, eventually making an exhibition. Everyone is afraid of the baker, but I'm grateful in my ruined apartment in August 2022, which wanted to give me answers to all of these questions. It was about institutional vulnerability, the role of archives, and the role of chances. But the main point was about memory and life after the ruin. So just a couple of images. Irpin. The second exhibition which I made with Halina Hleba touches another issues, what's called I Dreamed of Beast, and focused more on ambivalence nature of war. When the document become more vivid and impressive than any artworks, or artworks become an important document of life during the crime. We build exhibition using documentary evidence, including documentary films, artworks, images from terminal drones and cameras, poetry, diaries, and even dream recordings. All of this had significant component of the image of beast. So we designed an exhibitions as an institution, as a situation in a woods or a fairy tale forest, which is a viewer enters and tries to pass through. It is very symbolic because the war currently affected forests, entire communities and ecosystems. And for example, the Srebranski forest as a protected area in my native region has almost been destroyed, and my close friend was wandered there during the battle. So just a couple of images from there. Yeah, I don't think I would make the third exhibition about the war, but before that I returned to my apartment again, which was already without a roof, and it was prepared for the reconstruction. And at that time I still could not understand that experience, and asked my friend, artist Yaroslav Futimsky, who wrote a poem based on my messages in the beginning of full-scale invasion, and completed it when he was in my apartment exhibition. So I asked him to make a performance reading based with this poetry. This poem could put at the end of my personal experience and somehow summarize everything that happened with me. Yaroslav read the text in the room with bare walls and no roof, and it was raining at the time. And my personal space that narrowed and become as small as possible to compare to the open rainy sky. And at the same time, it became like a cosmic size. Yaroslav poetry started with an idea of the end, but still there is no the end. We're just telling the same story after the comma, repeating the same after a while. So the third exhibition occurred in November 2023, and I co-curated it with Boris Filonenko and Natalia Matsenko, and the three of us started talking about the fact that we don't want to make an exhibition about the war, and we don't want to make exhibition as large, but instead it was about the war and touches many aspects. It has 2 floors and total of 5 large halls. Among the topics of war, we wanted to talk about the history and empty spaces, identity, imperialism, memory, landscape, roots, and at the same time more personal dimensions like place, language, relationship between individuals and communities. While preparing this exhibition, I refused to write the text for catalog on 2 topics. I could not longer write about my loss of my home because it seemed to me that I said everything that I wanted, and feeling that I can speak about love or relationship because it always was infected. At the exhibition, we talked a lot about the persons who find himself or herself in a state of war. That how do they act? What did they feel? What do they do? We also attempted to understand what people thought when they are in other wars or like military conflicts. So finally, it is also a question what happened next with us or for us. As a writer, words means to me a lot, and I thought that even though language was shaped by war as well, it was still everything that I had. But when the exhibition ended, I found myself in a situation when apartment was almost reconstructed by the neighbors with the governmental support. And in the summer, I can start to renovate inside the apartment and to live back again. Love was everywhere, especially when you looked at these images I will show you later. So this is a couple of images from the show we did last year. So when I speak about love, I'm thinking about all of these images that I saw in the beginning of full-scale invasion, and that I saved to my phone to remember how it was and what is really matter. However, now I don't have enough words to describe my personal experience and express other experiences to make it clear to everyone else. So I try to speak with help of art. Sometimes my country has much in common with Wakanda from Marvel or Makonda from Marquez. One of my friends makes drones instead of art, and another one at war is with himself. In my texts and shows, I often use the image of tree as a vivid metaphor for reconstruction and life after the ruins. But what if they grow not up and wide, but inside to make a cage for the person? So just also a couple of images with, this is Anna Zvahintseva's artwork, and this is Yaroslav Futimsky artwork as well, and also his drawings that he's doing recently. This one. So of course war can kill and leave all living things, but in this particular war, Russia is killing democracy, human rights, freedom, environment, communities, modernism, art, dreams, fight and words, and trying to leave us without the future. I was getting to Berlin from Kyiv, took a train early Thursday morning. I woke up 4 minutes before the alarm clock to the sound of Iranian drones flying over my rental apartment. I went to wash my hair, but the water in the tub disappeared because of explosion nearby. I went to the train station during the alarm, got to the train, and woman at the 50 age joined me in Rivne. They become volunteers not because of their gorgeous desire, but because of need. One of them joked that she was driving more than one military vehicle in her Audi car with a laser interior. But she made this decision to be a volunteer. It was not my decision when I was forced to leave my apartment in March 2022. So I returned home because I wanted to make decision myself, to have the right to decide which country to live and which values to uphold. I want to be with the people who are not afraid to love and live even the situation of incredible risk. In 1946, Ukrainian writer Ivan Baghryany wrote the essay, "Why do I don't want to come back to USSR." He immigrated knowing that his country was occupied and his friends were killed or in exile. I returned to Ukraine because I don't want to return to USSR either. Since 2014, I have felt guilt and responsible for the fact that my hometown was under occupation. Even then I should have thought for the city, I felt guilty for abandoning it. It felt like I abandoned my past when it was the opposite. In all my texts that was written with a huge love to Ukrainian East, I was screaming about that. But at that time, it seems to me that it wasn't not enough. I might not have words at the moment, but it will definitely replace with the art in which I speak and trying to express all these difficult things, to name it. But it definitely have a home, but I definitely now have a home as an entire country, and love to all of these people who still live there and don't want or can to go anywhere else. And yes, the war is brutal and does war ruins everything, and everything is incredible danger, yes, but I return because I don't want to lose anything else anymore. In memory of Yura Matushak, who died in Ilovaisk 2015, in memory of those who lost their lives during last 10 years, with my all thoughts to all who are fighting now on the front line or in prison, and especially to Maxim Butkevich, Ukrainian human rights activist and defender who are in Russian political captivity now. Thank you.
Yeah, when you were speaking, I was exactly thinking of Maxim Butkevich too. Yeah, so if just we think of starting the kind of an exchange, perhaps not a discussion, Yassin used the words temporal jail or spatial jail, and you, Katya, used the word cage. And in a way, what Jan has been referring to was also a kind of there is a feeling that we are still in the same kind of a vicious circle of the never-ending war, and I also have this feeling with regards to the issue of migrants and refugees, which on the one hand was I'm just thinking how to formulate it as a kind of a framework which can embrace all of your inputs, because on the one hand, at least if we think of the European Union, so this aspect, human aspect, arrived on a really big scale, of course, in the 90s, due to the wars in the Balkan, right? But at the same time, starting from Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Ukraine, the European Union has been constantly sort of trying to tackle this so-called migrant crisis, as it's officially, unfortunately, dubbed, though of course that's not a crisis of migrants or refugees, it's a rather political or structural crisis of the Union itself. But on the one hand, I'm thinking of a jail or a cage in this context, because on the one hand, as we definitely see even at the moment, and AfD that you mentioned is one of the embodiments of that, that the more war we get, the more right-wing and outright fascistoid forces become powerful, and we are exactly in a year which will be testing this ground, unfortunately. On the other hand, I'm still thinking. Do you see that the background or the reason why those or the other migrants or refugees arrive play any role in that? So that because on the one hand there is definitely a racial differentiation, right, and that was also raised in a number of events and publicly in different narratives in the media, how Ukrainians have been treated in the European Union, unlike others. But at the same time, do you see the background and the basic reason why those or the other people come elsewhere? Does it contribute to the perception and how the entity is dealing with this issue? And has it changed over time? So can we really compare the refugee phenomenon that emerged because of the Second World War with what is happening in the 21st century? Are any resemblances in that sense? How do you see this? So, yeah.
So many complicated issues, of course, but I would like to maybe refer to the starting point of your query, where you mentioned Yassin's image of. I mean, it wasn't Yassin's image. He was quoting what has been stated by many people of this sort of open air jail when thinking about Gaza, and then it was just a certain kind of continuity with the experience of war, of the Second World War, that one finds in circumstances today. Certainly, if you look at what's going on in Ukraine, it's this is truly astounding, because we see the same images in the same places from which images were coming 60 years ago that were of rubble and catastrophe and disaster. So it's really uncanny. But you know, I mean, on one hand, I'm constantly drawn to this insight of a great writer, an American writer, a kind of a statement that we all know, that the past is not dead. It is not even past, and in a way, by watching what's going on in Ukraine now, one gets very deeply affected by the veracity of this observation. But I would like to point out to the fact, and this is a sort of, I think, not only East European experience, that there was year 1989 and 1990 and 1991, and that this enormous imperial construction that is underwritten by atomic powers and sort of full sense of its ability to do whatever it wants to do collapses. Soviet world has disintegrated very quickly. It's astonishing as far as imperial histories are concerned. This is really a very speedy process. And then we lived through, again, I'm talking about European experience more than anything else, through a period of great optimism, as it were. We really were, if you will, not only de facto but also mentally out of jail, to draw back to the starting point of your question. And it seemed that a lot of things are possible. In other words, that this is the beginning of an era where a kind of a open, liberal, and increasingly respectful of human rights variant of coexistence, the period in history, is with us. Very optimistic in the way we could think about the future. And then things turn around. So, in a way, in my mind, I'm not... A very important question to ask and to try to answer, I don't know how to answer it, would be to figure out what has changed, what has broken the hopeful and full of promise drift of politics in the world, in Europe. And I think it was radiating to other parts of the world as well, and brought us to the moment where we are really thinking that this is a time before war in those countries that are not yet at war de facto. So there isn't much hope really for a good outcome in the future before there is some dramatic caesura that will once again So it hasn't been jail all around, so to speak. It's and it hasn't been jail all around, it seems to me, in the Middle East either. I mean, there were very important moments when things could have opened up. After all, there were Oslo Accords. There was a process where it seemed that some possibility of solving this dramatic conflict, which is where it is right now, were on the table in a way. So, in some sense, it seems to me that there are very important. I'm not to speak of the history of the sort of a long period in Russia of very interesting and sort of optimism inspiring elements. I mean, starting with Gorbachev and through a period of cultural and political openness. I mean, it took time for Putin to grab this society by the throat the way he does, hold it right now. I wouldn't. In other words, it seems to me that the question is, the very important question is what has gone wrong in the relatively recent past, rather than viewing the condition in which we find ourselves as a continuous process of where we're in the grip of unfreedom in a way.
Yeah, right. It's just my short point with regards to the that you mentioned Gorbachev. Even like what yeah, it's really kind of astonishing that basically, even if you take either the Soviet history or the recent history of the Russian so-called Federation, you cannot find any single general secretary or a president who hasn't waged a war, including Gorbachev, who sent the military to Lithuania in particular. So that's also something that the kind of foreign policy as war making is also something which is so fundamental. But just as a follow up, do you see that? But also, like drawing on what Jan said, I'm in particular thinking of the last Agnieszka Holland's movie, right, Green Border. So it's also like on the one hand, the war is a mechanism which unavoidably sort of produces the phenomenon of migrants as such, right? At the same time as we've experienced these authoritarian or outright totalitarian regimes have been also what is called weaponization of migrants, right? So on the one hand, it's so are there any, so how to respond to, so of course you have to create the circumstances in which something like the war cannot even emerge, right? But at the same time, at the moment, are there any proper humane and humanitarian responses to this issue that can at least soften the outcome and not contribute to the right-wing rise that we have been observing for the last years?
Well, I think the reason, let me talk about the Middle East. I'm from there and I know there better. I think the reason behind war is injustice. There are very long-term injustices in the region. The Palestinian cause is one of them, but it is going the time the other Arab countries gained independence, Palestinians were displaced, ethnically cleansed, and 3/4 of the population were became refugees. So this is one of the very big issues in the region, and with the full support of Western powers, democratic powers, which also, because the Middle East is one of the main regions for energy, and we are talking about reconstruction in Europe after the Second World War, so it gained very important strategic significance. So the Americans and the Europeans supported authoritarian and very conservative regimes because these cliques, these families can provide a very important commodity, stability. Freedom was not on the agenda, equality, justice, rule of law, democracy, freedom of expression, whatever. No, stability is to have a stable Middle East. So there are high stakes for the dominant powers to keep this region like a jail. Actually, it is jail. And this jail was, I don't think that Oslo was a time of optimism. Actually, it was not for the, maybe some, yeah, I would agree that some hoped that it will be a beginning. But soon it was lost, very soon actually. And the very beginning of Palestinian was being eaten away day by day from the very moment the Israelis didn't have real intention for Palestinian to have freedom and sovereignty. Never, never. So yeah, this is one. Maybe there was an opening actually. There was a beginning, which is the Arab Spring, and we lost it. It was for some time in Egypt, some time in Tunisia, even some time in Syria. Yeah, it was. I mean, if you think of a day for democracy, or to commemorate democracy in the Middle East, it will be the revolutions. The day when these revolutions started, huge popular mobilization and optimism and spring. And yeah, but we lost for, I wouldn't say because of the of imperialism or colonialism or whatever. It is also we have so many problems, unsolved problems. And if I was talking to an Arab audience, I'll be very critical about our shortcomings and we have so many big problems. Right now, I am writing about unfreedom, and I think that we are the least free people in the world because of three things. Of course, colonialism is there, imperialism and colonialism is there. Second, tyranny. We have some of the most tyrannical regimes in the world, and the Assad regime is one of them, 55 force, and after killing at least 500,000, many people talk about 1 million killed in the last 13 years. And I would say that, yeah, we have the most nihilist religious organization that developed sort of monsters. So yeah, there are all these. But the Middle East is essentially a jail because there are layers of injustices, and we haven't been able to find a breakthrough. There have been always resistances and efforts here and there, but yeah, we are still in jail. And I use the term stuckedness, stuck to represent the situation, which I think it is becoming our global condition, I'm afraid. Even in Europe, of course, people are living better, but I don't see that there is different future. And there are no promises. The only the only door open is to the past, to the AfD, to the National Assembly in France.
This is very strange.
It is. That's why I talked about a utopia and a vision of something. We need something global. The problems are global and the solutions are still local here and there. And this will not work. Will not work.
Let me just drop. It's infinitely surprising to me, and this is possibly as great a danger to the stability of the world as what Putin is doing, that in the United States, this totally crazy guy is quite likely to be elected president. I don't understand how it's possible, where it comes from. It just, in some ways, it belies and defeats political science as we know it. How can one, I mean, not one, but so many millions of people?
Right, maybe one of the answers also lies in the Middle East in some sense, in particular in the invasion in Iraq, I think. But Kateryna,
permanent state of exception. The Middle East has never been seen rule of law, whether within states or a region at large. Always there is exceptionalism, which exceptionalism is no longer about laws, about rule. It became sort of cultural condition, a structural, permanent condition. And yeah, that's why it is also, I agree that actually I see the Middle East as the more a pattern that's becoming globalized more and more.
Just we will also get back to the audience. So get ready with your questions. I just wanted to ask perhaps one of the last ones to Kateryna, because Yassin mentioned the number of 7 million of those displaced in Syria. In Ukraine is actually throughout the last 2 years at least, or throughout the last 10 years, it's perhaps even more, both internally so-called displaced and especially abroad, but over the last 2 years, it's more or less the same number. It's up to the 8 million who were forced to move elsewhere, which is more or less the population of Austria or Switzerland. Maybe you can also just outline shortly how this aspect of, because I also remember that from the very first weeks of the full-scale invasion, right, we've got this phenomenon of the so-called art emergency residencies, not only abroad but also in the country, especially based in the west of Ukraine, which we institutionally also so hugely contributed to, and have been supporting and working with them, and you personally as well. So I'm just, maybe you can, what's your take on how it's been perceived and worked through in the art realm, that we like it or not, but so you personally decided to go back, right? Many people didn't, or they're commuting back and forth. But anyways, that it's more than certain that Ukraine is has already become a kind of a, in a way, diasporic nation, as well as Syria, by the way, and for that matter, Israel too has become a diasporic nation very much. So how is perceived and mirrored in the art field, and what are the approaches in working with that issue?
Thank you, Vasil. But I maybe also need to mention that I see two waves of migration and like leaving the country. And first wave, of course, was in 2014, and many friend of mine was like taken like actual status of refugee because there was no other choices to stay in Europe, for example. And I do remember the story of my friend from Mariinka, which already at the time was super targeted by Russia, and she flee to the Czech Republic and taken this status of refugee. And of course, the second wave after the February 2022, when like people start leaving the country, but also just staying in the country, but in other places. And this is like changed a lot the city in Ukraine as well, because like Lviv, for example, become like really different compared what was happened there before. And because of people moved, they feel that they need to do something, and they start creating new spaces just to communicate, to support each other. And if they have some opportunity to support someone else, they like trying to use this. And of course, for institutions, it's like really huge problem, because lack of money, because lack of people, still dangerous to do something. But I think that the most important to everyone who are there is just to like really do, because otherwise it just does, for them it's there's not an issue. So I would say that institutionally we have, we will, maybe in future we will like see it more, but it's like really change the landscape for artists. like big institutions like struggling with all this like money issues and people who work in there. But what I'm feeling and seeing now that many artists trying to like really create artist-run spaces and small spaces because they feel more comfortable there, not because they don't have any other spaces to be, but because they need such feeling of being secure, I think. And in such places they can share art, what they can do, and like talk more freely, I think. But this is also the way of maybe of recreation communities, because of, as I said, people like change their cities, and some people left and some people stay, so you have to like reconstruct all the connections between each other, and even like with people whom you know before. So it's, yeah, we in these conditions of changing, and we will see what will happen next. But what is also maybe important is that maybe in very foreseeable future, it would be like really a big problem for Ukrainian art, because this needs to be somehow supported. And as I said, all the like fundings and everything, they try to help army and collect money for Ukrainian army forces by, I don't know, selling some artworks or like organizing some events and so on. But still, it needs to be produced as well, because the culture, like more than everything else, targeted in Ukraine right now. And this fight for identity and history and like everything is happening because of culture. So I think that like this like really super important thing. And the issue of materiality, I think one of the key one. Thank you.
If I can ask you, may I? Like a question. The way you speak, it seems to me that you're talking about the artistic community and what's been done as if this community was in conversation with itself, with other artists. Is there a visible role or possibility to actually come out and draw? What role does art play for ordinary people, if I may ask, right now, and how does it figure in the process of rethinking its place for the artistic community?
You mean inside the country?
Yeah.
Well, I think that I'm speaking this and like trying to describe this situation with communication, because it's like really something that you need to have on all this conversation between each other. But also what is come up with all this 2 years experience is that it feels like this is not only about people who live in now, but also like many other people who were killed and persecuted during Soviet times and earlier, and all of them like feels like the people who like the like living now. So all this conversation is also like taken ease with the texts, for example, or with the works, like especially with 30s, like artists from 30s, and like many artists trying to like read more and like research more about that time, just to like also to be to try to understand something, I would say. But yeah, I think that this conversation is super important for many people inside, just also to like feel that you're on the same page, or like you have, you know, some just like this feeling of support is also super important, to like have some to understand that you like still have something in common, and all this, I don't know, like values that we trying to save and protect, that they're like still protected, I would say. But yeah, the conversation is super important, and it's still possible to do something. But as I said, it's like all the time at risk. And
when you exhibited
yeah,
things, there were people coming to see it.
yeah, actually, it's a really nice example of the last show, because this is space that was opened just with our show. So we did the first show for this new space in Lviv, which were preparing for 8 years. So they decide finally to open it. And this is renovated Gem Factory, which is the name of institution now as well. So we have these 2 floor, and because of this new space, like many people came to see. But also what was important to us, how like we did this show. We all the time was thinking about all communities that were affected the war, like soldiers, how do they will feel inside the exhibition, or like people who escaped their home, because this is like Lviv, one of the most like places for like soldiers, because there is a center for them to like to recover, and also because it's a place where like some students and families come. So the city changed a lot, and we like all the time was thinking about it. And it was really eye-opening that many soldiers, for example, they were coming for several times to the show to see. And some people were crying with some works. And of course we have different reactions and comments about it, but still it feels like they need to have some space to fulfill this traumatic experience, because they can't speak about it, not openly, but just because they have any words. And they, when they see artworks, this is helps them to feel it and to try to like recover themselves. Of course, this is not helps for 100%. This is not will change any situation, but still it's something that like give you not hope. I would not say exact this word, but still something that's like give you understanding that you are not alone. Because for many people, this is a huge problem to feel themselves alone, not because they don't have relatives, but because they don't. They can't describe their experience, and they don't believe that someone can understand it. And this is like, I think, also the hugest problem in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, definitely not the hope that you can encounter in the current Ukrainian art. Yeah, it's really a very good question. I would also love perhaps to answer it, but maybe later, just to give them more time to our listeners. So just raise your hand if you have any question or a comment, and I will assist you with a microphone. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for a discussion and your inputs. And this brought me to one thinking and a question to you. So you told that migration is a way, like Piketty told that migration is a way to redistribute wealth. And maybe we can see refuge as a way to redistribute security. But on the other hand, we can speak about security as general physical security, but also as a security of mental security, as feeling secure in your environment, in your social environment, like in a safe space. And I would like to ask you what you think about the relation between these two securities and how it feels like what becomes more important maybe in the different situations. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, the idea is of Thomas Piketty, which is a French economist, very well known now, and his work is very interesting. So he said his idea is that there should be a global tax on capital. And he says that there are other ways to redistribute wealth, and people are taking this in their hands by migration. The capital is not coming to us, we are going to the capital. So this is his idea, but I find it very interesting what you said about redistribution of security, because in the short term, it is people move because of security. Ukrainians are not moving out of their country for income. In the longer term, I guess issues of income are very important, but in the short term, Syrians or Palestinians, or it is not about income. But I said this thing about income to say that why we are stuck in time. Because the guardians of the global system don't want to tackle issues of injustice on the wealth level. We are stuck. We don't have a future because, yeah, they don't, future means change. That the present situation should change. So, and this manifests itself in severe insecurities here and there. Of course, most of the refugees are moving to find security. The 4 Syrians who put ropes around their necks in a Lebanese jail because they didn't want to go back to Syria felt securer in a jail in Lebanon than going back home, which is their home. So for Syrians, it is very important because we have been not secure for a long time. For a long time. For one, I was in jail. Many of my friends, brothers, wife, have experience in jail, and most of us are now refugees. All this is related directly to security and to the fact that Syria has been under a state of exception since March 63. So 61 years of under a state of siege or a state of exception, which is one of the oldest in the world, I guess, and it produces insecurity. It hasn't produced security. You said something. There was a other than sorry.
Yeah. So how this physical and how for you the physical and mental security relates to each other?
I am. Well, this needs one. This requires one to think. This is a very good question, actually. I don't think I am good at answering this. I think those who are interested in traumas and traumatic experiences are better entitled to this. But I think you gave me some stuff to think about. Thank you.
So my question is for you, because you are you are from Middle East, because yes. So because you said that in Middle East for centuries, I can say there were like layers of injustice, and then you also mentioned that like in the time of Arab Spring, there were some like touches of hope, or that you could feel it. But do you think that like in the last year, like this movement of woman life freedom, do you feel also the same hope that like in Iran, that there was some touches of hope that like finally like LGBTQ family and also women, after like I can say thousands of years of injustice, they talked a little, or at least they got an heard of.
No. Look, I don't dare to talk about centuries or thousands of years of inequalities. I am sure, of course, the history of humanity is full of injustice. But I referred to modern times. So, and actually, what I meant is after Second World War. So I don't mean that before that it was okay. Of course, it was not okay. But I restrict myself to to the origins of the present situation. And I think this applies to the Iranian people. They have their glorious moment in 1979 that was confiscated soon by the mullahs, and I'm really impressed by the ability of the Iran people to resist, and every few years there's an uprising, and so far crushed, unfortunately. But I think they are building for the future. It is clear that our struggle is not easy. It is very clear. We've been resisting on different levels and being crushed. But I hope I am not extremely mistaken by thinking that sort of a culture of resistance and a culture of freedom is growing more and more. I don't know very well about Iran, but I guess it is there, and it is growing there in Syria and Egypt and Palestine, the region. So I cannot promise, unfortunately. One cannot think that things will change in 10 years, but we have a saying in Arabic, it wouldn't have arrived to you if it wouldn't have arrived to you if it remained in the hand of X. So if it will stay, you'll not be here if the ones who were of privilege didn't lose their privilege. So I'm sure they'll lose their privilege. Khamenei will not live, not as a person, I mean his regime will not live forever, and it is still turning.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you come with your experience from very different geographies and different generations, and that also allows us to find commonalities and also changes over time. And I think what concerns me is a bit the question, what is the role of emotion and how we deal with emotion and trauma that still seems to persist from the Second World War, and how, because I feel our generation still is in the position where we become more aware how we deal in a humane way or inhumane way in relation to war or the inhumanity that we see. And what do you think, how do emotions, how they are a driving force towards or away from something like guilt and anger and sadness and joy, and in the directions that we take in this situation of being stuck? And at the same time, how eventually nowadays how emotions play out have also become very dysfunctional when we see who's being elected and what kind of driving forces are guiding us, and especially in times of platforms where maybe forces, or online platforms where forces or social energy can be channeled into into changing things, but they evaporate, or I don't know. So maybe some reflections that you have on the role of emotions and the notion that post-World War, a lot of what we call negative emotions have been suppressed, and this generation starts to deal with some of that legacy.
So maybe you start? Yeah, please.
I don't really have
For me to have 2 minutes to think of it.
two informative insights, except to say that it seems to me it's very important to study, in other words, to learn about seriously about these various episodes that have brought catastrophes on humanity, and it's not so and I mean it in a very general sense. I mean there is enormous volume of productions of work of art of various kinds, books, paintings, sculptures, films, and the way to sort of engage one's emotions, I think, and it's not very complicated. One can have access to them. Of course, in a sense, it would be wonderful to have a guide that tells us there's limited time that we can devote to things. Just because there is so much of it, what should be watched? I mean, I'm not going to pretend that there are such guidelines anywhere, but it's the question. But that's the road, in my judgment. In other words, engaging, and then you find your way through it in consequence. But I don't know what's the artist's view.
Well, I have maybe a super small answer because I just can't answer this question. Obviously, the emotions play a super important role for politics, right? And especially before elections, and especially in social media, in all this digital world. But I think that we shouldn't avoid any emotions. We just try to understand how to work with that and why it's happened. And especially, I think that the most important, this feeling of being insecure, and this is somehow come up again and again with different issues, right? But as a public media, we're trying to explain the context why it's happening, and but still, I think that we have to work in individual way, but also somehow collective as a societies, as a communities, just to understand the way how it happened. But I think that there is no clear answer what to do with that, and yeah, but this is super important now.
So let me.
I have a recommendation: WH audit and this poem.
Yeah.
Important insights.
It needs poets to answer this question. So I can say something from the personal experience. I mean, what has helped me to deal with the losses that came in the last 10 years after the uprising in Syria and the struggle and the war and the chaotic situation is that when I was in jail, I was young, I was healthy, so it was sort of an early vaccination. It is like when you are vaccinated against COVID-19, you are okay. I mean, even if you got the infection, it will not kill you. So yeah, I mean, in those years in jail, I despaired a lot, and at times I felt crushed by it because very long years, and you don't know when will you be released. I mean, it took 11 years and 4 months before I was brought to court. And even after I got a sentence of 15 years, I spent an extra year. So you feel that you cannot predict what will happen to you, and you are as weightless as a feather, and as insecure. And so I really despaired a lot. But that despair, in a way, was the vaccination that helps me now not to despair at all. I am not saying that I am I am not optimist. No. With all these tragedies around us, I think optimism is stupidity. I'm sorry for this. But I mean, I don't lose hope. And I think because of the situation in the world is becoming darker and darker, of course, in Ukraine and the Middle East, in Palestine, in Syria, it is very dark. because of this, we have to keep going. At least those of us who experienced the harshness, the cruelty in the past, and who survived it. I survived it. And because I survived it, I have the role to tell the story, to narrate, to analyze, to conceptualize, to think of it. And especially now in these years, I feel that emotions, the role of intellectuals, those who represent the mind, the reason, is becoming less, and the emotions are flooding, and at times with their irrational edge. I mean, Jan talked about Trump. We have a fascist guy that's about to rule the most powerful country in the world. So, and there are millions, dozens of millions of Americans that will elect this guy. So they say at times that we live in the age of reason. Forgive me if Trump will be elected in this age of reason, then what emotions and what the darkest secrets of a human, as Hannah Arendt said, that the human heart is a dark place. So if this can happen in the age of reason, what's bad about human heart and about irrationality? So yeah, I hope this says something about, answers your question.
I have a comment rather than a question. When you're talking about the similarities between the Ukrainian and the Syrian war, I was thinking how we or how the European Union is treating refugees is very, very different. I mean, it would be absurd to think that someone who flees from Ukraine is pushed back at the Polish border. It would be an absurd thought, but it's not an absurd thought to think of Syrian refugees who are, as we've heard, pushed back on the Croatian border to Bosnia. So there is a political kind of maybe a hierarchy of the worth of life in a way, and this also goes into the cultural space because, and I think it's really good that there is so much money which is provided by public funding for Ukrainian shows, for Ukrainian artists, and I think that's really great. But it's also a political interest why this is done. Also, there has not been put so much money into culture for Syrian, for exhibitions by Syrians or for Syrian cultural events than for Ukraine. So I think there is a discrepancy. And yeah, that's just something I wanted to say.
It is an old story, the story of selective solidarity. I don't say that the Ukrainians shouldn't be supported this much, they should, and even more. But yeah, one cannot prevent oneself from seeing that there is discrimination. But however, I mean, the right solution to the refugee crisis is not that Europe opens its doors for us to come to Europe. We need, as a Syrian, I want to go back to Syria, to my country. It is not, the right solution is to be there, and for Africans. And that's why we need a global project. I mean, it is not fair that 10 of millions, I think every single Syrian would like to leave Syria now. Most of them. I wouldn't say every single, but maybe 90%, because everything is, I mean, there's no future. And believe me, it is not that economy is not working, services are destroyed, everything. This is, of course, very important, but because there is no future. And that's why Syrians started to become refugees after 2003. 13, 14, after the chemical deal between the Americans and the Russians. Syrians were bombed with sarin, and then there was, 3 weeks after, a huge massacre. There was a deal between the Americans and the Russians to disarm the regime from the chemical weapons and not to punish the regime according to the international law. And of course, it appeared that no, the regime was not disarmed. So there was no punishment and no disarmament. So that's why Syrians started to feel that there is no future and started to en masse move everywhere in the world. So yeah, the right solution is that we need a global coordinated effort to deal with these issues. Maybe soon we'll have ecological catastrophes here and there. We have a global ecological problem, environmental degradation everywhere, and temperature, I think, in parts of Iran already can arrive 50 degrees or more than 50 degrees, and humans cannot live under these conditions, and the floods here and catastrophes here. So the solution is also to deal with this problem. Who are responsible of the environmental degradation? It is not the victims, actually. It is the US, it is China, it is Europe. So no local solutions to global problems. We need new global system.
I believe, right?
Thank you, all of you, for everything you've said. I think I will also have a question for Yassin, but I imagine that a lot of you will have a lot to say to it. Because you were speaking about the sort of stuckness in a momentum and how to get out of it, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot. And I wonder, and I know we need like systemic and structural solutions, but I'm observing a new wave of sort of solidarities that I haven't observed before. And I wish it didn't take genocides for us to come together, but something is happening. And a lot of us, in particular from occupied and deoccupied Europe's East, are having dialogues with people, for example, from Central Asia that we didn't have before because of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. And in the last 2 years, I've also observed like one of the moments that was really humbling for a lot of us was seeing the Syrian solidarity with Ukraine. And for a lot of us, it also made us deeply reflect on how we have come short of being there for Syrians in the same way in the last years. And a lot of us are doing a lot to make up for the time and being in dialogues with Syrian thinkers and intellectuals that we haven't had before. And this is, for example, something that gives me a lot of hope, and also in the broader context of the ruptures and divisions within the left, because we, from, for example, Europe's East, I can only speak from like my own experience, cannot meet with a lot of Western left and global left because it denies the imperialist and colonial nature of the Soviet Empire and Russia. And so we are meeting in these debates where we cannot, our experiences are denied, our lived experiences, socio-historical experiences and generational trauma is denied. And it of course goes in, you know, various like directions. It's not a one-way road, but it's very hard to have a lot of those debates now. But like I'm seeing different debates happening in the meantime because we're bypassing the sort of imperial centers of Russia and the West and having discussions within ourselves. And a lot of interesting stuff is going on there, and that gives me hope. And I wonder if you see it, if you feel it, and you know, if it means something.
Well, I hope you are right in what you said, because I'm still critical of the practices of solidarity in the West. I see them very selective. I see there's a market of causes. Some causes gain a bigger share in the market. some tiny bit only, and see that many practices of solidarity are patronage, actually. Our big brothers in the West are patronizing those poor Ukrainians or Syrians or Palestinians or Kurds or whatever, or Africans or whatever. So I think there's a need for more militant and more radical solidarity. Based on respect and equality. There's much misrepresentation and much disrespect, as I see here, to the too many struggles and many causes, and people just don't know. So the importance of such an event is that we exchange ideas. You know part of the stories of Katia and Jan, myself, and so you feel that we belong to this world, and we can translate our sorrows, our experiences, our sufferings to universal meanings. And this is, in my personal work, this is the main thing I try to do, to do this translation.
Maybe from your side, some reflections on how, because I mean, especially in the Ukrainian art, it's been really one of the major issues, rethinking imperialism through so many aspects.
Yeah, when you asking this question, I was thinking that we really was talking a lot about how not many connections do we have with East and like other countries that have this colonized past, and we need to talk about it. And I know that it's not that obvious colonization, perhaps, right? And like speaking about Soviet Union, we still have some problems inside our past as well. We have to like deal with that, and this is also super difficult to like see it and to name it, to recognize and to take some responsibility for that. So I think that really the big issue of solidarity and like rethinking this past have been raised for these 2 years inside and outside the country by many Ukrainians. And unfortunately, I can say that this is like maybe the same, because this is like all happening in different platforms, maybe I would say a bit chaotic. So that's why this is not synchronized between each other, but maybe in the future we will see some results about it. Like I know that Daria Tsebaluk were here to talking about the colonization, and I was like trying to research on example of landscape of my native region, Luhansk, which has some like specific hills, like which is graves as well, and this is iconic image of Donbass was before the industrialization, and how, for example, this land was colonized for several times, and how these all graves were raped by Tsarist Russia and then by Soviet Russia, and this is all somehow like change all these perspectives, and I think that we will talk about it maybe later, but yeah, this is something which is in the condition of staying. I mean, the question of it, it's just trying to like be name it, right? Like what kind of colonial past do we have? Is it like really can be comparable to someone else, or like how like deal with that now, or how we can recognize ourselves as some actors and at the same time someone who was treated by the same state. So yeah, it's like lots of questions inside.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think we have to leave it there. So thanks again, Jan Tomasz Gross, Kateryna Iakovlenko, Yassin al-Haj Saleh. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for your attention. Again, I remind you that there is only 1 week left of the exhibition part, which is here at nGbK Alex. And we will continue in actually 2 weeks after the Easter break on the 6th of April, Saturday, at Between Bridges. Also at 5 p.m. with a presentation by Ukrainian filmmaker and writer Yuri Hrytsina. Thanks so much. I think we can go on with an informal communication afterwards. Have a nice evening. Thank you.